Now, I would assume, or hope at least, that what I'm going to say here next is in no way controversial because there's so much factual evidence to back it up that even Raiders fans should at least acknowledge its reality. The Las Vegas Raiders are one of the absolute bottom barrel poverty dog shit franchises in today's NFL. I couldn't imagine getting emotional or worked up over that type of statement when it is so fucking factually true. And I'm not talking about, well, the last 3 years they've had a losing record. Like, it is so much worse than that. You know, the 2000 season, they go to the Super Bowl, and then they get mollywopped by the Bucs in the Super Bowl. Let's look at 2003 and beyond. So the past 22 seasons. They have made the playoffs twice. Twice! The Raiders! That's an average of less than a playoff appearance per decade. Dog shit. No playoff wins. 13 head coaching hires in that span. Or head coaches, I should say. 12 of those last 22 seasons winning 5 or fewer games. Not only have they struggled, they have sucked donkey dick. And they've got the ultimate Nepo baby in Mark Davis running the show. Like, what a fucking disaster. Al Davis did his best in his dying days to try and take this team into the organization to the fucking grave with him. And his son is certainly trying to continue down that path. And just in the past 3 years, speaking of the past 3 years, they've had 2 general managers in Dave Ziegler and Tom Telesco, both fired. 2 head coaches in Josh McDaniels and Antonio Pierce, both fired. All the while, expecting to be taken seriously in the AFC West, trotting out dudes like Jimmy Garoppolo, Aiden O'Connell, and Gardner Minshew, their quarterback. Like, what the fuck are we talking about here? What the hell are they doing? Like, you could say, well, they hired John Gruden and gave him a 10-year deal, and then a couple years later, Fidelity was emailing racist shit. Well, it comes back to the whole thing of why did you give John Gruden a 10-year contract to fucking begin with? Like, I go on and on and on. Like, I'm not saying that Mark Davis and the Raiders don't care. It actually is what makes this worse, right? This is not like a Donald Sterling Clippers situation where he didn't give a fuck because he knew he could make money without having to give a fuck. I genuinely fully believe that Mark Davis and the Raiders organization give a fuck. They're just that damn incompetent. And you could sit there, folks, and you could talk about Tom Brady until they're blue in the fucking face. But the reality is he's a minority owner. He might be the GOAT quarterback, and he is. But that doesn't translate into shit automatically when it comes to being a front office person, being an executive, being an owner. So fucking what? Nothing to do with it. It really doesn't. And now we go into this offseason. They fired Antonio Pierce, who frankly, the problem isn't that they fired him after a year and a half. It's the problem of they brought him back in 2024 to be the permanent head coach when he had no fucking business being that. He had never even been a defensive coordinator. But they ran with it, and predictably it didn't go well. But honestly, you look at the situation that he was in, what exactly were you expecting here? I'm just saying. So now the answers to all of the Raiders' problems apparently is going to be to hire Pete Carroll? That Pete Carroll? This will be his 4th. And I want to say this again. His 4th NFL head coaching job. Was an NFL head coach when I was in the mid-90s, like 94, with the Jets. And then a couple years later with the Patriots for a few years before Belichick. The fuck are we doing here? His career records are solid, right? 170, 120-1, 586 winning percentage, 500 record in the playoffs, 2 conference championships, a Super Bowl title. Yeah, like his resume is good, but goddamn, he's going to be 74 during the 2025 season. And you're just now hiring him. He's going to be the oldest head coach in NFL history, surpassing Romeo Crennel and about a decade ago when he was with the Houston Texans. And think about the list of other oldest head coaches. It's not great. End stage George Papa Bear Hallis. End stage Marv Levy in 97. Bill Belichick in New England at the end. Dick Vermeil in Kansas City. You know, like, no. You have a lot of history to suggest that this is not a good thing. And these guys, when they get to a certain age, the game starts to pass them by and they're not nearly as effective. And you have went and not hired a guy maybe that was in his mid-60s or late 60s that could still give you quite a while. You hired from Jump Street the guy that is going to be the oldest head coach in NFL history, and best that I can recall, only the second guy in history, in modern NFL terms at least, to be a head coach of 4 different teams, the other being Bill Parcells. And you say, okay, well, what's so wrong with that? You also got to remember when Bill Parcells took the Cowboys job in 2003, he was only like 62 years old, give or take. So he was in his early to mid-60s throughout his 4-year tenure with the Cowboys. Pete Carroll's coming in. I don't give a shit what you say about his culture, about his energy, his enthusiasm, all of that shit. He's going to be over a decade older taking this 4th job than Parcells was, an infinitely better coach, period, when he took the Cowboys job in 2003. And because of his age, not because of Pete Carroll or anything that Pete Carroll's done or anything about Pete Carroll's approach, you bring him into what has got to be for him the ultimate win-now situation, if there's ever fucking been one, just because of his age. Like, that shit doesn't make any fucking sense. For a team, an organization that is bottom barrel dog shit, it's going to have to build this thing up from the studs. You don't do that with the oldest head coach in NFL history. That is goddamn stupid. It's like the freaking White Sox a few years ago hiring Tony La Russa. You get what you fucking ask for. And last I checked, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Michael Bennett, Cam Chancellor, Bobby Wagner aren't coming. They aren't here to carry Pete Carroll's ass. And last time I checked, the Raiders do not have a quarterback in place that in any way, shape, or form inspires confidence, and nor do they have any obvious path to go getting a real quarterback. So in a division where you have Andy Reid, Sean Payton, and freaking Jim Harbaugh, you bring a guy that's older than all of them and is a defensive-minded guy at a time where the league is clearly pushing towards the offensive side of the ball. And all this time, build a culture by winning games, period. Why would you think that mid-70s Pete Carroll can do that? So what happens? Pete Carroll comes in, and let's say his first year or two, he actually does some good things. He probably will, right? What's your ceiling? 8-9? 9-8? Okay, and then what? All you're doing is kicking the can down the road for the inevitable. You're probably going to have Pete Carroll influencing a bunch of your personnel decisions. Like, none of this makes any fucking sense. You know, it never happens until it happens. But you just hired the oldest head coach in NFL history before he's even coached a fucking game for your team. Could you imagine in 4 years, this guy's going to be like 78 years old? You really think he's still going to be coaching this team? And if he is, what level of effectiveness could he even possibly have at that point? Man. If this was, let's say, 2016, 2017, and the Raiders were hiring Pete Carroll, I would say, okay, he's a little on the old side, mid to late 60s, but you could still see a path of 5 to 7 years with him at the helm. You can't possibly tell me you see that now, do you? And it's hard on the one hand to knock the Raiders for saying, hey, you're hiring a head coach that's won a Super Bowl, but how many head coaches in NFL history have won a Super Bowl with 2 different teams? I'll tell you. Goose eggs. And magically, he's going to do this in this situation with this shit show? In that fucking division? Where you got to compete against not just Andy Reid, Sean Payton, and Jim Harbaugh, respectively, but you got to compete with Patrick Mahomes and Bo Nix and Justin Herbert? Like, child, please. How could this end up as anything other an epic fucking disaster that we look back and laugh on in 3 or 4 years? Yeah, like, no. And to all those that were pointing to like Tom Brady being a big part of this, you would assume he would be a big part of this. If his thought was to sit there, I don't care about his energy level, anything else. 74 this year is 74 fucking years old this year. That is too old to be president. That is too old to be in politics, whether that be in Congress or the Supreme Court. And you're going to say, well, of course it isn't, because everybody fucking in those three branches of the federal government are that age. And my point is, we need to get ageist with those fucking roles and stop letting people that old fucking serve. There also should be some type of logical point where you say, these guys are too old to be a fucking head coach. Pete Carroll, going to be 74 years old this year, is too old at this stage to be an NFL fucking head coach, especially when you consider the situation. If you were talking about him being hired by the Dallas Cowboys, a team with some real talent, and if you want to believe for some weird reason in Dak Prescott and say you have your quarterback, which is sketchy in and of itself, you say, okay, a Pete Carroll makes a lot of sense for the Cowboys. And in some respects, I could say there's a team in a win-now mode. You don't care about 7 to 10 years from now. You care about the next 1 to 3 years. Then Pete Carroll makes sense. The Raiders can't seriously be thinking about their next 1 to 3 years alone and expecting that they're going to be a championship contender in that time. That's fucking insane. At best, their hopes are to hover around 500 and miss the playoffs. I can't see any reason for Raiders fans to be excited about this. And just because the name and the marquee value is exciting, that doesn't mean that the result is going to be a whole lot better than Antonio Pierce, Josh McDaniels, or so many of these other fucksticks that have been the Raiders coaches over the past 2+ decades. This is a dumb move, dumb hire. Good on Pete Carroll for getting one last big payday. Proud of you, bro. Because you just took them to the fucking cleaners.